Brad, there's a weird machismo around SUVs and trucks. And I gotta tell you, as a minivan owner, I love owning a minivan. I think it is the greatest all-purpose vehicle. And I can't wrap my head around the fact that people think that it's not the coolest vehicle. I love owning a minivan. I think they're fantastic.
Well, plus, the whole joke with a truck owner is that as soon as somebody's moving out of their apartment, they're going to call you as a truck owner.
Yes.
And even though minivans have that same kind of load capacity, nobody's calling a minivan owner because they figure that guy's got problems enough.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. But like my minivan, I can throw because I have an 11-year-old Honda Odyssey, and the seats in the back fold right into the floor, easy peasy lemon squeezy, like it's amazing. Yes. And then I can slide the front seats forward, and I can go down to Home Depot and get a whole 8-foot sheet of plywood or drywall or something, throw it in the back of that sucker. That's a truck. Yep. That's as good as any truck. Like, I don't know what else I need there. Like, that's super useful. When I go to Comic-Con, I can literally throw my entire booth in the back of that van. That's a truck. Yes. It's all contained. It's locked up. It's out of the weather. Like, I don't know why it's not more celebrated as a vehicle, Brad.
Well, plus, when you go on family vacation, you can get everybody's suitcases, everybody's luggage, everybody's stuff, and then you get that very satisfying experience as a dad, Tetrising that stuff in just right, because the whole family's standing outside the car saying, that's never going to fit, it's never going to fit, and you just sit there with quietly chuckling to yourself, you just wait till you see what I got planned for this luggage.
You don't know what this van can do. You ain't seen a vehicle that can do what this van can do.
I'll make it fit.
And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about minivans and making comics.
And minivans and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Keller, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of the comics documentary Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And we have a big thing to remind everybody of that coming up San Diego Comic-Con. If you're planning on going, if you're on the fence about going, you need to know ComicLab is going to have we are going to have our first ever Comic-Con panel and live podcast recording. It's going to be, and Brad, help me out on the times here. It's going to be Friday night. Is that right? Do I have that right? I don't have it in front of me like a dummy.
It's Saturday night, Dave.
Saturday. Dave, kill it.
We're doing great today. It's going to be Saturday night at 8 o'clock in the evening. So you're not going to have to worry about missing anything else on the show floor. You're going to be winding down 8 o'clock. Go out, have a nice tasty beverage, come back ready to go at 8 o'clock. And we will be doing ComicLab Live at San Diego.
And you're probably guessing right that we're doing it at night because that lets me and Brad man the booth, so to speak. Booth 1228. So you can also come down and see us on the show floor. Booth 1228. We're going to have a bunch of new pins, ComicLab pins, and old and goodies from past days. Don't forget to come get your free ComicLab pin. When you mention that you're a listener of the show, we've got the Let's Talk Comics pin to give you from ComicLab. So come out to booth 1228 and come out on Saturday night to that show. Absolutely.
We're going to have a good time meeting and greeting all of you. And speaking of having a good time, I heard a little bird, David told me, that you had a particularly good time this week hitting the old publish button on a project of yours.
Oh, my goodness, Brad, did I ever? And that little bird was, by the way, a grown man named Dave Kellett was the little bird. Yes. So yesterday, of all days, we finally were able to hit publish on the new Sheldon site, sheldoncomics.com. And the reason why that is important to mention is it's now also hosted on our official sponsor for the podcast, DreamHost, over at dreamhost.com/comiclab. And I have to tell you, I could not be happier about having made the move, about how efficient it's been, about how smooth the whole process has been. I've been online 25 years now. I'm super happy with making the move over to DreamHost.
Absolutely. And cut your costs to about a fifth of what they used to be.
Let's talk about cutting the costs. I was on a previous host that I don't want to just besmirch any fine companies, but it rhymes with Blamazon. And the costs are significantly smaller over at DreamHost than what I was paying on Blamazon.
Absolutely. And if you've been listening to Dave and I talk about owning and controlling your own work, and you think, nah, you know what, maybe these guys got a good point between them, and you're thinking about getting a website of your own and starting out, this is the perfect way for you to do it. Go over to dreamhost.com/ComicLab. You'll see a couple of starter plans for you to choose from. This is a low impact, no risk way for you to get used to building a website, starting a website, and it's going to grow along with you and also be there to help you every step along the way. This is a great way to get your feet wet and build a website that you can grow into.
Absolutely. And, Brad and I always joke that we laugh at podcasts where they have to do a sponsorship of Mattress Warehouse. I love mattresses. But here is a sponsorship that both Brad and I use and love in our own businesses. I loved Brad's recommendation so much, and I loved my initial responses so much to DreamHost that I actually, Brad, I don't know that I told you this. I went ahead and pre-purchased 3 years of hosting on DreamHost. Wow. So I'm in it to win it with DreamHost. I'm all in. I pushed all my poker chips in. So do check them out over at dreamhost.com/ComicLab.
Dave, today we've got a special show planned for today because we have not one, not two, but all three nominees for the National Cartoonist Society Silver Rubin Award in long-form online comics. Dave has been nominated for Drive, I've been nominated for Evil Inc., and our special guest, Phil Foglio, has been deservedly nominated for Girl Genius. Phil, given the nature of your competition, what topics can we look forward to you discussing in your acceptance speech?
Wow, what question, man.
I was wondering where that joke was going.
Yeah, really. I fully expect to just stand up there and cry and say, you guys cheated two of the best people on earth. What are you doing? Oh my God. I'll never be able to show my face in comics again. While gloating inside, of course.
That's right, of course. I was telling my in-laws last night, it's the best possible scenario because I respect and love both of you so much that I really don't care who wins. Anybody that goes up there, I'm going to be tickled pink because I love your work. I love Dave's work. I'm partial to mine, and it's going to be a very pleasant experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. No matter who wins, but I think we're all three of us are looking forward to seeing Phil take that award home. So congratulations, Phil.
Right. That's right. Congratulations early.
Now if I lose, I'm going to feel terrible.
No.
Well, listen. Now I'll do my official introduction. Phil Foglio's with us here today. Phil, if you've ever picked up a comic, you're familiar probably with Phil's work. Phil's been doing some fantastic work for a long time. Nominated for 7 Hugo Awards, won 5. He's been nominated for the Eisner Award twice, 5 Web Cartoonist Choice Awards, 2 Stink Pug Chronicle Reader's Choice Awards, and a Steen Con Airship Award. Holy moly. Now you see why Dave does all the introductions. Graduated from Chicago Academy of Fine Arts in 1978, Foglio wrote and illustrated the comic strip What's New with Phil and Dixie for Dragon Magazine. By the way, when I mentioned in my Discord server that I was going to be interviewing you today, that's the first thing people still go to is Phil and Dixie. I remember Phil when. And another person immediately chimed in with the illustrations you created for Robert Asprin's Myth Adventure series. There's my personal favorite, the sexy, campy Xenophile, Not Safe for Work sci-fi comic, Buck Godot, Zap Gun for Hire, and of course, the work for which you are currently nominated that is co-written by your wife, Kaya, Girl Genius. And we're going to talk to you about all that stuff and more in this episode of ComicLab, Dave.
Absolutely. Well, it's a long list of awards, Phil, when someone has to run up with a little cup of water to Brad as he's reading off the list of awards he won.
Like a marathon runner.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to talk to you first, Phil, because I'm fascinated to see how someone was able, because really you were the first to, in my mind, to carve out modern science fiction long form comics And in my mind, it's hard to sort of be first. But I'm sure you looked at like old Buck Rogers things and old this or that as sort of, roughly a guidepost. But what were your thoughts in starting long form sci-fi in comic form in an indie vein? How did you know that could work? How did you know that you could make that happen?
How did I know it could work? You don't. You just be a freelance artist. You have to have an ego of cast iron. You have to say, like, this is what I want to do. Best advice I ever got was write and draw the kind of stuff you want to read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else, and you'll just be, annoyed. And if you like it, well, you are not a special snowflake. There are other people out there that will like it, that will buy it. Your biggest hope is that they have money.
Yeah, that's what you're going for here, is fans with deep pockets. Yeah. Now, Phil, let's go back to the beginning. Science Fiction Club in college. You were very, very active in that. Describe for some of our a lot of our readers don't remember a time before it was cool to be kind of a geek or a nerd. Talk about doing a science fiction club on campus. What was geek culture like back then?
Whew. Well, the fact that you actually needed a science fiction club should say a lot. Science fiction was pretty much a ghetto genre. And it was like the last man standing. Mm-hmm. Back in the 20s, back in the 30s, there were these things called pulp magazines, which, were these cheaply produced things, and they came out like every week. And there were dozens of different genres. There were mystery, there was science fiction, there was sports, there was adventure, there was romance. And this was mass entertainment. Yeah. And what happened is they started getting picked off, as it were, by the movie industry. I mean, the movie industry came along, and all of a sudden, moving and talking things always catch people's attention. Right. Yeah. So, a lot of these genres, they could do it better or more viscerally exciting in the movies, So you got romance movies, and the romance pulps went away. You got adventure, and those went away. You got, war and crime and this, that, and the other thing, and they just kind of evaporated. Mystery held on for a long, long time because mystery could be a lot more cerebral, and you needed to actually see stuff in print to figure out, okay, at like fucking 5 o'clock, he walks from the garden shed to the mansion, and that's when he discovers the second body with the rake through its head, whatever. But the big holdout was science fiction. Yeah. And the reason for that is that in the movies and in early TV, special effects, which were the thing that science fiction had going for it, right, looked like crap. Yeah, they just were terrible. And that started to change in the 60s with, Star Trek. Yeah. But back in the early 70s, when I started getting into science fiction, it was still kind of, a transition thing. So back in those days, science fiction was pretty rare. It was a niche industry. It catered to several thousand people that, liked it, but there was never a big breakout science fiction book. There were the classics, of course, like, Time Machine and stuff like that. But whenever you were out looking at books and bookstores or this, that, and the other, if you saw something that dared to label itself science fiction, you bought it. Because, wow. And at that time, there was a very reasonable expectation that, you know, a person in the fandom had read every single science fiction book, every single one of them, and could discuss them. Before the internet, people talked. That's where science fiction conventions were. They were conventions where people got together and could talk about science fiction.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to like being mocked or, you know, having your allowance deducted by your parents or something. The way you communicated back then between groups was through things called fanzines, which were amateur magazines made by people that was just like, you know, printed on mimeograph machines, black and white, and they needed art, or rather they wanted art, in order to break up those endless blocks of gray text. And that's how I broke into science fiction, by doing fanzine art, which was super easy. I mean, you know, hey, I'm willing to give you free art. Really? Great. Give me free art. And I will publish you, young man. All right. Perfect.
Exposure.
It's one of the few times when doing it for the exposure was actually worth it.
Yeah. And that's really is true, because your first entrance into the Hugo Awards are nominations for Best Fan Artist, right?
My first Hugo. Thank you very much.
That's right.
Phil, for those listening, Phil is currently holding up, and Phil, will you describe, because I know the base is different for every Hugo Award, but will you describe for everyone what a Hugo Award looks like?
It's a detail copped from a 1957 Chevrolet. But the Hugo Award represents a rocket ship. Ooh. The bases are in fact made unique for each World Con, which is the World Science Fiction Convention. The World Science Fiction Convention travels about. It's never in the same city twice. They usually are based in the United States and were for a long time, and they followed a rotation of East Coast, Midwest, West Coast, boom, 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 and occasionally you get something out of the country. Yeah. The current one is in Chengdu, China.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're having some problems. But, you know, next year is going to be in Glasgow, Scotland.
Is it really?
Yes, it is.
I could be talked into Glasgow, Scotland.
I was
that sounds
just
fun.
thinking that. That's on my family's list of bucket list places to visit. That might be a thing.
Certainly will try to get there ourselves.
Yeah.
Yes, Glasgow is a lovely city. They've held WorldCon a couple of times. And apparently everybody who went had a marvelous experience. Scotland is just great by itself.
Right.
Yeah.
And probably by that time it won't be part of Britain anymore. So, you know. Let's see. And the year after that, 2025, it hasn't been officially decided yet, but nobody else has bid for that year. It should be in Seattle, my hometown.
Oh, about time, yeah.
Hey, that's really good. Well, I want to say, because it's nice to have someone else float your successes rather than you doing it. I want to tell everybody what a tremendous achievement it is to get not only nominated 7 times, but to win 5 Hugos. Yeah, I personally am in such admiration of you for that, because that's the big enchilada in the sci-fi world, and to have wrangled it 5 times is such an achievement, and boy, is it deserved for all your decades of work so that question is going nowhere. I just want to say congratulations on that, and it's very well deserved. But I will say this though, for as far as sci-fi goes, and I think all 3 of us will recognize this as artists, you chose possibly the hardest form of sci-fi to draw, in that the detail work required for steampunk, and then the sort of light magical overlay of steampunk is that, Phil, that's incredibly detailed work that you've had to do over the years. I mean, you could have done smooth with Star Trek interiors, but you're like, nope, we're going steampunk. We're going in deep on the gears.
Every time I've ever tried to draw steampunk, I sit there looking at it going, why would anybody do this? So talk about what your decision was to create a steampunk comic. Because I desperately want to know.
Like all of the correct decisions in my life, it was spurred by my wife, Kaya. We had the idea for Girl Genius back in the early 90s. And we were like, okay, so... and we were working on the stories and trying to figure out what it would look like. And originally, the series was supposed to be like contemporaneous.
Oh.
Yeah. And it just was not coming together. It was, it was kind of like, well, we could do this. Yeah, I guess we could, but... And while we were... talking about it, Kaya was going through, I keep a lot of old sketches. And she was going through stuff we were, which I keep around for inspiration, back from when I was good. And, and she found, a bunch of stuff with like airships and, characters with top hats and, electro canes and stuff like that. And she was like, so what's this? And I was like, I enjoy drawing that stuff, but, nobody does anything like that. We just kind of like looked at each other and was like, nobody does anything like that.
It's just a light bulb moment. Yeah.
And then as soon as we decided that it was kind of steampunk flavored, which, by the way, we don't call it because we have no punks. We
True.
I invented the term gas lamp fantasy. And, there's its own heading. It's got its own thing on Wikipedia now.
Wow.
So that's gratifying, and she is in fact listed as the originator.
It is a brilliant turn of phrase. Yes,
it is.
But I got to tell you, I had an idea for what, like a 6-10 page short story in a sort of pseudo-Victorian steam, as you would say, gas lamp. And I literally started drawing the first panel. I got to the first cog, Phil, and I said, to heck with this. I'm out. I can't do these cogs. I can't do cogs.
How do you do that in terms of because it takes, do you have an engineering background?
No, I do not. But I really enjoy hanging around with scientists and engineers and stuff like that. And just, listening to these guys and girls talk.
Yeah.
It's just, it's very enjoyable. But no, I mean, I can appreciate a well-designed bit of engineering. But, make one myself? No.
So where do you go for like idea? Like, do you go to users manuals or is this stuff just coming right out of your head?
There are a plethora of old, engineering manuals that you can find like pretty darn cheap.
Yeah.
In bookstores, and now of course it's all online, and you can just Google submarine engine room and boom, there it is.
Yeah.
And then you just print it out and away you go. Drawing it over and over and over again, yes, of course it's terrible. It's like, oh my God, why do I do this to myself?
Yeah.
And Kaya always has to tell me, all right, fewer close-ups of people's excited faces and more establishing shots of a burning factory, okay?
Easy for you to say.
Like all of us, though, do you tend to, when you're doing an establishing shot, because you have some incredibly beautiful establishing shots of airships or coming in onto a city or coming into a piece of machinery that I imagine... Yeah. Do you have that sense, that lost sense of time that we sometimes get while you're drawing, where you look up and you're like, oh, it's dinner time. I literally just had breakfast. How did this happen?
No, because I never really get into that. I don't draw for very long at all. I mean, I break constantly.
Yeah.
If I'm drawing at like 5 minutes at a stretch, it's a lot. And on the other hand, I've been drawing for 50 years and, can still use my hands.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, to be fair, for those listening, that actually is the smart and recommended path in drawing, is to not go continuously. I was more curious because there's such a clear love and a detail that you infuse in those shots that I was sort of curious to see if you are lost in the moment. But you're right. The better way to build and keep a career is to keep that hand safe, and frequent breaks are the better way to go there. Absolutely.
Yeah. Plus, I get a lot of reading done.
Yes. I'm curious because I don't know the answer to this either. Because if I were doing this, I would be very quickly trying to do a lot of digital tricks like copy and paste and so forth. Are you working in ink or are you working digitally these days?
Nope, it's all pencil and paper.
Wow. That's even twice as impressive than I figured it was,
Yeah. A couple of reasons for that. One, I didn't start doing this, until I was in my mid 30s. So I'd already, established the routine. Two, I like having originals that I can sell.
Yes.
Yeah.
And three, I don't have to worry about, a power outage or a solar flare, disappearing the last 25 years of my work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. Speaking of work, I want to transition from art to business for a second, because I think we've told you this the last time we had dinner, which, gosh, was pre-pandemic. But both Brad and I and a whole host of others owe you a tremendous thanks, because not only were you an inspiration art-wise, but you were an inspiration to us business-wise in terms of not only stating very clearly, I'm going to draw what I love, and I'm going to bring the audience to me, in the sense that people are drawn to a passion project and are you find your crowd basically, and you have. But then you also, as much as possible, again and again and again in your career, you've tried to own and control your business as much as you could, which both Brad and I and a whole host of people who look up to you learned from. And I wonder if you could talk about that for a minute, about that decision process back in the day, because it was not a common one when you started to do this, about owning and controlling as much of your career as possible.
It comes down to a simple truism, which, even back then I saw, other artists kvetching about, which is that nobody cares about your work as much as you do.
Yes.
I talked to a lot of science fiction authors who were like, I got 10 books in this series and nobody will publish it because, and it's, I know I could sell them. I mean, new readers come into the market every year.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I started doing independent comics in the 80s, and I was inspired by Wendy and Richard Pini with ElfQuest, and Dave Sim with Cerebus. And I was like, that is totally the way to go. I was also familiar with underground comics. The other important thing to remember is that if you want to make a mark as an independent comics person, the thing you have to do is something independent. Draw something, write something that Marvel or DC cannot or will not do. Now, that line is rapidly shrinking because, they are frankly desperate enough that they will now consider almost anything, and, the rules of propriety are just like practically gone. So, I fully expect Marvel to offer to reprint Xenophile any day now.
Well, speaking of
agent.
That's right. Now, speaking of Xenophile, I've talked on the show before about when I was thinking about getting into not safe for work comics. I came up to you at New York Comic Con and I asked for your advice, and we ended up spending the evening at a Indian restaurant, and you spent so much time with me, giving me advice, giving me your thoughts. It was literally was kind of a turning point in my career, being able to talk to you. One of the things that stood out to me that I still remember is you gave me this advice. You said, don't have a plan B. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah, pretty much.
Talk about that, because you had some really interesting thoughts on that.
Somebody once said, if you want to learn how to play poker for money, go and play poker and not have any money.
Yeah.
You cannot afford to lose.
Yeah.
So, not have a plan B. Don't, I hear from people all the time who are like, well, I'm doing this comics project, but, I'm doing this for DC or Dark Horse or something like that.
Yeah,
This is just to get my name in the door. I'm saving my really good stuff for later,
Yes.
And it's like, no, don't do that. You put your best stuff out there and lead with that. If you go out there and say, wow, I've probably really only got one good idea for my entire life, that's admitting defeat before you go. If you're a creative person, you will come up with more good ideas. Theoretically.
I've got to say I've seen certain points in my life where that has absolutely been true. And in fact, Dave, we talked about it on the show a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about the Patreon churn. And you say, the question was, Dave says, and now that we've got a certain amount of stability in our careers, has the fire gone out? Have we lost? And I said, I'll tell you what, I saw my Patreon go down in the beginning of January and February, and all of a sudden I started coming up with this idea, that idea, this strategy, because I've got a lot of eggs in the Patreon basket, right? And that's kind of at the heart of what that is like, by God, I'm going to make that work one way or the other. I'm going to find a way. There's going to be any number of things I'm going to try. But it's because of kind of that whole idea. Don't have a plan B, right?
Brad, you're learning how to play poker in real time, my friend.
Because God knows I can't play poker for real.
Really? Yeah. We should play a game or two.
Everybody bring 100. We'll play with Phil. That'll be great.
That's right.
Yeah. But I mean, to continue this line of thought, though, is that you have, and what's interesting is you have, and again, I've learned from you in watching this from afar, you have believed in yourself again and again and again to go from comics to then go to Girl Genius Pros, to have Girl Genius Games, to have Girl Genius expanded games. I mean, in terms of electronics and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, talk to us about the self-belief and also the curiousness and interest to try different things like that are not comics.
Well, it's predicated by the, clear-eyed understanding that, Girl Genius is Girl Genius started out as a successful independent comic. And, people were like, we sold like, what was it? 14,000 copies, which for an independent comic was really good.
Yeah.
blow me. That's terrible. That's, even my best success is considered a write-off failure to, any major publisher.
Yeah, but they have the overhead of 20 people and 30 editors to cover as well. So, yeah.
True. Yeah. So then we went to webcomics, which had the benefit of being, a much lower buy-in cost. I mean, we didn't have initial print fees or anything like that.
Right.
It also had the benefit of getting stuff in front of people's eyes on a daily basis as opposed to a tri-yearly basis. We did really well as a webcomic.
Mm-hmm.
Still couldn't touch, Marvel or DC or, manga in Japan or anything like that. Now, manga Japan, that's kind of cheating. But, you got to have something to shoot for.
Right.
I mean, when I'm sure you both are familiar with One Piece.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Greatest, most successful comic book in history. When the newest volume came out, the initial print run was like 57 million copies.
Yeah.
Oh,
Amazing,
was
right?
it? Oh my God. By the way, our house was one of those, but geez Louise, I didn't know it was that high.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's the initial print run.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's gone back to print. So, like I said, you got to have something to shoot for. Shoot for that.
Yeah.
These days, comics, you always have to assume that the industry you are in is in transition and probably dying. Comics has been dying ever since I got into it in the 80s.
Yeah.
And, you look at the numbers and they're not wrong.
Right.
Comics used to sell, Superman used to sell in the millions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they, sell 100,000 copies, the entire office goes out for lunch.
Yeah.
Right.
Which they have to pay for, but still.
They go Dutch, yeah.
They go there. Yeah. Again, just like the movies, comics was doing reasonably well, and then special effects came in, and all of a sudden, you will believe a man can fly. Wow,
Yeah.
I guess you can. So, and now with Marvel, last 18 years?
Mm-hmm.
And I got news for you. The blowback from the movies is not lifting the boats of the comics.
Right.
They are hanging on, but the only reason they're still around is the movie companies regard them as R&D.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They are IP farms in many respects.
Yes.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
are.
I'm reminded of doing a comic convention panel. This was back during the Webcomics Weekly days.
Yeah.
And we had you up on the stage with us. There was all 5 of us.
Oh, I remember that was a lovely panel, by the way.
Yes. Oh, it was a great time. And during that time, in fact, Phil was sitting right in the middle. It was 2 of us on one side, 2 of us on the other. And we were singing the praises of selling directly to your audience. And Phil made a really passionate case for distributing to comic shops. And I still remember the moment you said, well, listen, I've got some different thoughts on these if you want to hear them. And all of a sudden, the 4 of us stopped and leaned in like the old E.F. Hutton ad. And it was all of a sudden like this, our own little Last Supper, right? With everybody leaning in. My
Phil
question
holding his
to
hands
you,
out gently. Yeah.
Yeah. So my question to you is, to what extent is distribution, including comic shops, but also other places like Amazon and bookstores, how does distribution fit into your business today?
It's still a very important part of it.
Yeah.
The big problem for people entering the field, unfortunately, is that the only distributor of note is Diamond. There's like 1 or 2 others like Lunar and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But Diamond Comics, they are very picky about what they carry. And a lot of, newcomers tell me, man, I submitted my stuff to Diamond and they turned me down.
Yeah.
So I don't really know what to do about that. We got grandfathered in because I was doing stuff, like I said, from the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
As many different ways of distributing your product as possible is really the smart way to go. Always make it easy for people to give you money.
Yeah, that's really strong advice, actually. Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, we have our own shop that we do through Topatico. But yeah, we sell to comic book stores. We sell to Amazon. We sell to Barnes and Noble. We sell to, I still have a few individual retail accounts. We take stuff to conventions.
Yeah.
Now, convention sales of books, terrible. Yeah. I mean, they used to be amazing. I mean, we used to make a good convention, I could make like $15,000 just selling books.
Wow.
Now, forget it.
Well, conventions have changed a lot from certainly in all of our lifetimes. Conventions have really, really changed.
They have. And I think it's a couple of things. For one thing, every place has become New York. In that I went to the New York City Comic-Con a couple of times, and I was feeling pretty good about it because I don't get out to the East Coast much. And it was a big show, and we had new books.
Yeah.
I set up my booth, and we had a lot of interest, a lot of people coming by and going, "Girl Genius, I love this. This is awesome stuff. Thank you." And then they would say, "Oh, the new book. Yeah, I just got this. What do you got new?"
Oh, geez.
This came out last week. Everybody, in the major markets, everybody is too media savvy.
Yeah.
They know what to look for. They buy it off of Amazon if they buy it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And we're almost kind of a victim of our own success in that way, in that, we've got like 20 volumes of Girl Genius.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that weighs close to, 15 pounds.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
You need 2 bags to hold it all.
Yeah.
Which you get for free.
but yeah, even the shipping on that though changes your business model too.
That's right.
That's
right.
It does. And who the hell wants to lug 15 pounds of books around the convention floor all day?
Right.
So,
it becomes prohibitive. And even if you did the like Robert Kirkman, I always liked that he would let certain books go out of print, and then he would do an omnibus edition, like that would collect the first 3 volumes, right? But and in my mind, I always think, well, maybe that's what I'll do someday. But it's like those pages are still there. Instead of 3 books, it's just 1, but it's just as heavy as those 3 books were. Probably more because you've got a hardcover around them, right?
No, actually, we had a deal with Tor Books once, and they were like, "Wow, this Girl Genius, it's won, Hugo Awards. We publish science fiction. We should publish this." And we were like, "Yes, okay, do this."
Yeah.
And they published an omnibus. They published the first 3 volumes in 1 book. Did reasonably well, but not as well as they thought it should. And the problem was, quite honestly, they had no fucking idea how to market it.
Right.
That's got to be for somebody that's been doing this with hands-on for so long. How frustrating is that? Very
frustrating. But the problem, the comic tale of problem for us, is that they are Tor Books. They buy stuff in the millions.
Right.
So their costs were like super low.
Right.
So they were able to put together an omnibus, first 3 volumes, hardcover, nice paper, with a cover price under $40.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's super impressive.
Yeah. And super fucked us because, people would come up to the booth and they would say, wow, I've got this omnibus,
Right.
I want more of the story. And we would say,
Right.
well, the omnibus is out of print, but we have the individual volumes here. Here you
Yeah.
go. And they would say, oh, wow, okay, yeah, this is soft cover.
Yeah.
And it's $25.
Yeah.
So if I bought even the next 3, that would be $75. Where's the cheaper, better version?
Yep. And it's
Right.
going to look right on my shelf when I put it next to it on the shelf. It's going to have the same spine. I've heard people with that kind of idea too, right?
Yeah. So we made the difficult decision to not publish omnibuses until we are done with the story.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Then we will, because then you won't have, because once you start putting out omnibuses, people prefer omnibuses. So,
Yes.
So they will stop buying your individual issues and wait for the omnibus. If there is absolutely no indication that we are going to do omnibuy at some point,
Yeah.
then they will keep buying the individual ones, and hopefully they will buy it again.
Can I just say, Phil, I'm so happy to hear you have this problem, because my assistant Beth and I, for many, many hours, have talked about how and when and the logistics of doing an eventual sort of box set hardcover collection for Drive. Because even now, we have to do really complicated math to figure out reprint numbers for one. If we're going to print 3, how much do we reprint on 1? And then eventually for 4, how do we reprint for 2? As I'm sure you've had to do over the years. And all of that math is leading towards the ideal selling through of all of those individual copies by the time it comes to go make that big box set. And it probably will never work perfectly, but it's just so comforting to hear someone who has a similar problem in trying to time it all out and do it in the best way possible business-wise for the eventual omnibus and or hardcover box set or something like that. So I just want to say, just on a human-to-human level, it's nice to see someone else with that exact same logistical problem.
Now, as we wrap up the show here, I've got one last question I want to pitch to you, because you mentioned You'll Believe a Man Can Fly. And I still remember the cover of your Plastic Man run, You'll Believe a Man Can Ply. And I always wanted to ask you about this. You had, Plastic Man is one of my, far and away, one of my favorite characters. And you had a great run on Plastic Man for DC Comics. And if I'm remembering this right, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you had a great angle on it that the chemicals that E.L. O'Brien fell into that made him into Plastic Man also gave him a contact high that lasted indefinitely, which accounted for his wacky behavior. Talk to me a little bit about that creative decision, because I've always marveled at how you absolutely threaded the needle and came up with a wonderful description of what Plastic Man is.
Yes. Okay. So for those of you unfamiliar with the character, Plastic Man was originally a guy named E.L. O'Brien, who was a criminal getaway driver, known for amazing escapes. And a bank robbery went wrong. He was pursued by the police into a chemical factory. He was wounded. He fainted. He fell into a vat of, some sort of mysterious acid, and fell in and passed out. Managed to escape, and then wandered away because apparently the police decided, well, he's in the acid, he's dead now, and just immediately all went home.
As police are wont to do. Well, that's our job here.
Yeah. Especially in the Silver Age. Yeah.
And afterwards, he discovers that, the acid has apparently like chicken bones put into vinegar overnight, they become all bendy and stretchy.
Yeah.
The thing is that the guys I worked with on the book, my friends, Doug Rice, who was responsible for the giant robot comic Dynamo Joe, and Hilary Barta fabulous artist, who's done more stuff than I can shake a stick at. He was the artist, and he has, this amazing plastic cartoon style.
Yeah.
And we were like, well, we really want Hillary to do the artwork on this, so how do we justify that? And so we were sitting around and we were like, it's simple, Eel O'Brien, he's on acid.
That's absolutely beautiful.
We were able to make that work because in every issue we had a couple of pages that were done by a more realistic artist, John Nyborg, who was able to throw Hillary's Gorfy stuff into sharp relief. Would something more photorealistic like Neil Adams have been better? Yes, but John's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Phil, congratulations on your nomination for the NCS Divisional Award, the Silver Reuben. And honest to goodness,
the silver, yeah.
Well, I've looked in prepping for this. I was like, I wanted to find out whether it was Division Award or Divisional Award because the copy editor that lives in my head thought it was important. And I saw that 2 years ago, Dave. I don't even know if you know this. They rebranded it as the Silver Reuben.
Yeah, and part of that was I think they had their own nomenclature problem for a couple of years there, marketing wise, where everyone said the Reubens, as we say, the Eisners or the Hugos, but there's only one award that's the Reuben. It's this big, gigantic sculpture that's based on a lampshade of Rube Goldberg. And but everyone would call the divisional awards, like best comic strip, best magazine illustration, they would call those the Reubens. So what they did is they just made them all the Silver Reubens, which is not the worst workaround in terms of nomenclature.
Phil Foglio, thank you so much for joining us here on Comic Lab.
Thank you, and good luck to you guys as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, my friend.
Dave, I've got one quick update before we let everybody go for the week. And this one is painful for me because if you remembered, I've talked on the show a couple times, probably made it a pro tip at one point about the importance of Google domains.
Oh, yeah.
I was a big fan of Google domains. It was the price was much less than I was spending at another place. And they had the privacy wrapped right in. In other words, you didn't have to pay extra for privacy. It was just assumed that you wanted to keep it private. And I figured when I switched all of my domains, and I have a lot of domains, but when I switched them all from the previous registrar to Google domains, I saved nearly $200 a year on my domain registration.
How many domains do you have?
I got a few. You never know when you're going to need another domain. I just pick them up.
Listen, humble brag over here. I got a lot of domains. Don't you worry about it over there, pretty. I got a lot of domains.
You never. I just figure you never know when you're going to need them. So I do have a lot, but I was saving a lot of money with Google domains. So it broke my heart when I saw that Google domains Google is divesting itself of the domain registrar business, and they're going to basically offload all of that to Squarespace for registration. So if you are like me and you had all of your domain registrations over at Google Domains, you're going to have to keep an eye out and make sure that you're paying attention because pretty soon all of that is going to be handled by Squarespace.
So this is a non-small detail about Google's business is that again and again and again, we have seen them build, launch, maintain new small businesses that to you or I or the average small to mid-sized company would be profitable. And maybe this wasn't, so that's another thing, but seems to be profitable, but aren't profitable enough to the scale that they're used to in their traditional advertising business. And they end up just killing it off. And I'm wondering if it wasn't already the case, that we should now really consider long and hard before we bank on any sub-business of Google in our own business.
I had the same thought. I had the exact same thought. It makes me much less likely to consider a Google product because, as you rightly point out, this has been happening for a little while now, where it's like, I mean, okay, just off the top of my head, Google domains, the Google RSS reader, their RSS reader, they single-handedly brought RSS down by not supporting that. You can go to Google Plus, right, which was supposed to be the Facebook color. They've had a lot of things that they've pulled the plug on. And I don't know that I'm going to be very reticent to throw in on another Google product.
Yeah, it's a weird. I mean, I get it. They're arguably one of the biggest companies in the world, and so maybe this was just pocket change to them. Yeah. But it does give me pause. And also, do you know? Because you are the holder of so many domains, we get that now. We all understand now that Brad is the owner of many fine domains. How are you going to navigate this transition to Squarespace?
I don't know.
Do your prices go up, first of all? Do you know?
I have been able to find no information on that, but listen, you know the answer to that question, just between you and me. You know the answer to that question. And here's how my prediction, here's how it's going to be. There's going to be no change. They're going to say no change at all. It's going to be a smooth handoff to Squarespace, and it's going to handshake deal. And probably for the first year, that will be accurate.
Yes.
And then after that, Squarespace is going to say, oh, by the way, we're going to have a price increase. And by the way, my prediction is they will say that if you want privacy, that's going to add extra. Yeah. And it's going to be meet the old boss, same as the new boss. But it won't happen right away, like turning up the boiling water on a frog. They're going to wait because they don't want pushback. The last thing they want to deal with is that. So they will wait until we're all nice and comfy. We've got everything handled over there. And then they'll put the screws to us.
And so, like we've seen in the past, 12 to 18 months from now, we're going to see Brad being the slowly boiled frog, and he'll eventually have to move BradGeigerThirstTrap.com, Brad Geiger and his amazing abs.com, all the different URLs that he owns. And we'll see them over on some new site.
Yeah, me and my abs, all one of them, just one big ab. Yeah. And that means I get to say that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
And with a huge shout out of thanks to our friend Phil Foglio again for joining us on the show, and pre-congratulations again to his win at the NCS Awards. We're going to say your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
We should tell Phil that if he does win, you and I will both go up and accept his award on his behalf.
Oh my God, wouldn't that be pleasant? I would happily accept Phil's award for him. In the sense that, I would be overjoyed if he won for him, genuinely.
Yeah, do a little ComicLab patter on him, beepity bop, slap a little charm on him, and then go back to
that
sit
audience
down and watch the
won't
rest
know
of the
what
show.
Hit him in terms of charm, Brad. We're gonna bring so much charm. We're gonna have to buy a new URL that says Brad Geiger has a lot of charm.com.
Yes, and my friend Dave Kellett, co-director of the comics documentary Stripped getting a little bit of love this week. I saw somebody had a top 10 list of comics documentaries. Yeah, and you were right there. If I'm remembering right there near the top. So Strip's still getting a lot of love by people who know film. And Dave Kellett is the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com. I cannot wait to go over and take a look at all the bright, new, shiny things you've got with your dream host hosting. It's going to be great. And drive at drivecomic.com.
Well, I appreciate the hype, but I should tell you, Brad, I think there's been less than 10 comics documentary ever made. So the fact that I made that top 10 list is not that impressive.
There may be that.
I will say this, the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by the ever wonderful Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your your review featured on a separate episode. And don't forget to give us a 5-star review on Spotify, where we are tearing up the podcast charts.
And ComicLab is made possible by your continued and kind support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we will go ahead and say that twice, patreon.com/BradGeigerThirstTrap.com.
you know, now I'm gonna have to go out and get that site. Or else somebody else is gonna get it and,
Oh my
and
God.
put something
What
up there.
would we actually
Now
put
I
up
gotta
on
buy that.
I would just take a Photoshop version of Brad's face and put it on the what is it? The Tom Selleck bear rug photo? Or not Tom Selleck.
Yeah.
Who was it? No, Smokey and the Bear. Who's that guy?
Smokey and the Bandit was Burt Reynolds.
Burt Reynolds. Remember that Burt Reynolds Playboy shoot or Playgirl shoot that he did?
Yes.
I'm
yes.
just going to
a lot
take
of
that
hair on that guy.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to take that photo of Brad's face and just airbrush it onto that Burt Reynolds photo, and that's going to be the entire site of BradGeigerThirstTrap.com.
That's right. And I just have a hyperlink to it in my bedroom. And every time I go into the bedroom, I'll just bring that up on the screen for my wife and say, take a look. Aren't you lucky? Look at that. And then turn the lights down real low.
And then very quickly turn the lights off before you take off any article of clothing.